thank you, Marita, and thank you all for joining. You are in. Oh, Denise, hi. Uh, uh, Good friends and uh, loyal participants in our poetry discussion. Great to have some people back. Uh, and you are in for just an absolute treat today, because Joyce Peseroff is our special guest and one of the few living poets that we've had on the discussion group. And from the very beginning, I have been thinking about asking Joyce to read one of my favorite poems, not just one of my favorite poems by Joyce, but one of my favorite poems ever. And I will turn things over to Joyce and ask her to read her extraordinary poem, and we'll talk about it.
Thank you, Lloyd, and thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank all of you for being here this morning, which is not yet steamy out here in Bedford, but I think it's on its way. This poem, The Hardness Scale, was published in Plowshares, I think about 50 years ago. So yes.
Wow.
It's hard. Yeah. And when I read this poem, I used to, I talk about the metaphor of Mohs hardness scale, which is used to test the identity of minerals, a mineral, by seeing what will scratch it and what it will scratch. And later I had to discuss and introduce what a record was, because there's a mention of a record here and what a needle is on a record player. But now I think that's come back into vogue, so maybe I don't have to explain that anymore. So I'll read this, The Hardness Scale. Diamonds are forever, so I gave you quartz, which is number 7 on the hardness scale. And it's hard enough to get to know anybody these days, if only to scratch the surface. And quartz will scratch 6 other mineral surfaces. It will scratch glass. It will scratch gold. It will even scratch your eyes out one morning. You can't be too careful. Diamonds are industrial, so I bought a ring of topaz, which is number 8 on the hardness scale. I wear it on my right hand, the way it was supposed to be, right? No tears and fewer regrets for reasons smooth and clear as glass. Topaz will scratch glass. It will scratch your quartz and all your radio crystals. You'll have to be silent the rest of your days, not to mention your nights, not to mention the night you ran away very drunk, very, very drunk, and you tried to cross the border but couldn't make it across the lake. Stirring up geysers with the oars, you drove the red canoe in circles, tried to pole it, but your left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. You fell asleep and let everyone know it when you woke up. In a gin-soaked morning, hair of the dog, you went hunting for geese, shot 3 lake trout in violation of the game laws, told me to clean them, and that my eyes were bright as sapphires, which is number 9 on the hardness scale. A sapphire will cut a pearl. It will cut stainless steel. It will cut vinyl and mylar, and will probably cut a record this fall to be released on an obscure label known only to aficionados. I will buy a copy. I may buy you a copy, depending on how your tastes have changed. I will buy copies for my friends. We'll get a new needle, a diamond needle, which is number 10 on the hardness scale and will cut anything. It will cut wood and mortar, plaster and iron. It will cut the sapphires in my eyes, and I will bleed blind as 4 a.m. in the subways when even degenerates are dreaming, blind as the time you shot up the room with a new hunting rifle, blind drunk as you were. You were number 11 on the hardness scale. Later that night, apologetic as you worked your way up, slowly from the knees, and you worked your way down from the open-throated blouse. Diamonds are forever, so I give you softer things. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Do you want to say anything about how you came up with that image of the hardness?
The hardness scale. I've always been interested in science and the details of science, and I scatter them in a lot of my poems. I make a lot of references to scientific terms and discoveries. And so this was part of what I bring to poems, sort of uniting science and the humanities in some way, as a way of knowing. And it was part of just part of what's in my head. And I've always, as I said, I've always been interested in scientific concepts.
Oh, I should have said by way of introduction that you are the author of, is it 5 books now?
It's now 6.
6.
6 books of poems, yes.
And the newest one is?
The newest one is Petition, which came out with Carnegie Mellon about 2 years ago.
Is it that long? Oh my goodness.
Yes, it's getting there. It's getting there. Year and a half, 2 years ago.
Your new book. And that you were teaching in the creative writing program and in the MFA program at UMass Boston, and you directed. I think you were the first director.
I was the first director of the MFA program, and the pleasure that students in that program gave me, and still do, just following what they've been up to, following their lives as they post on Facebook, and following their work as they publish their poems and their books. It was such a great experience for me. I just really cherish my time at UMass Boston.
And so did we.
Yes.
So did we.
Thank you. Thank you.
Chris, what's one of the things that struck me the very first time, I think I heard you read it before the poem was even published. And what just absolutely knocked me out was that, in a way, it reminded me of a kind of modern version of a metaphysical poem, like John Donne, using science, using the least likely image to write a love poem.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because at Queens College, where both of us got our undergraduate degrees.
But not at the same time.
Not at the same time. One of my favorite poets was John Donne. And I I just adored the way he was able to use metaphor and play with metaphor and use a compass and use the discovery of the Americas in a love poem. And to me, that was something, along with Moe's scale of hardness, I never forgot.
And just also by way of introduction, one of the other things that I love about this poem is your sense of humor.
Mm.
And the play on words, which is sometimes a little grim, but it's sometimes very, very funny. And well, I just just hearing it again and hearing you read it again, just it seems a flawless poem, and just that just keeps you alert, keeps the reader alert at every moment. And it is one of the things that that I love about poetry, and that makes this such a just such a great poem. It's so inventive and then very moving and a real love poem.
And very fictional, I want to add. I remember that reading, Lloyd, and I think it was at the old Edison Hotel, and it was for Plowshares.
It was a Plowshares reading.
It was a Plowshares reading, and my husband was with me, and people were giving him the side eye as if he were the person in this poem who, and it's a character, and it's a fictional creation. And one of the things that I've always admired is the ability to create feelings from a situation which may be a construct, may and is not necessarily personal, or if personal, you don't know what the event was. And I think of the Emily Dickinson poem that begins, "It dropped so low in my regard," in which she's writing about a rupture of something, of some relationship that she compares to shattering a plate and placing plated wares upon my silver shelf, mistaking true metal for false metal. And we have no idea what she's talking about. I mean, we don't know if she's talking about her French. I think it's been speculated, maybe her friendship with Sue, but we know exactly how it felt. And that's one of the things that that I really admire in reading a poem. And it's certainly the situation here is much more specific and much more fleshed out. But again, it shouldn't be read as autobiography.
She wants to make that.
Good. I'm sorry. Who?
I certainly would want to also. If
So,
would want
Bill, did you have your hand up for a moment?
Well, I was just going to say that it's irresistible to read it as autobiography.
Yes. And that's one of the way, that's poetic mischief, isn't it? It's where the characters you hope are so convincing that they ring true. But in fact, it's not autobiography.
Yeah. Does everybody recognize the phrase at the opening of the poem? Diamonds are forever. Can we place that?
And
What?
We're old enough.
Here's
I think most of us are. Stephen, do you
This
do you
poem
read?
about Sean Connery?
Wasn't it the De Beers ads?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, it was the De Beers ads for engagement rings. And I think this is using a diamond as the standard engagement ring was, not particularly traditional until the industry started to push it. And this was one of the ways that the industry in South Africa was trying to popularize the use of diamonds, the sale of diamonds, to benefit those companies.
And it's a brilliant line for an ad.
Mhm.
I mean, how many I mean, there are probably a handful of advertising slogans that have really stuck. Some of them have even survived the companies themselves. But this is one that's really stuck, and you make brilliant use of that as the opening line of the poem. It just immediately pulls the reader into the poem, because even if you didn't quite remember the ad, you know that it sounds like something you've heard before, and are sort of, what does that mean? It just pulls you into the poem. And then the rest of the first line is, so I gave you quartz, which that can which completely undercuts the opening line. And I love that it's all on one line. Diamonds are forever, so I gave you quartz. And even the sounds of the word diamond has just this magical, the word itself has this kind of glamour to it. And then quartz is, I mean, it's sort of the ugliest word in the poem.
Yeah, it rhymes with plot. P-L-O-T-Z.
P-L-O-T-Z. Yeah.
Yes, it is. It's a real, the arc is a real come down from diamonds to quartz.
Warts.
Yes,
And
which has warts in it too.
huh.
And an even
So-
more
so
vulgar
is it-
rhyme.
I'm sorry.
And an even more vulgar rhyme.
Uh, and it just, it just the and then, which is number 7 on the hardness scale, is just, what do you make of that transition? How do you take that transition? I mean, so many things are going on in the first 2 lines in the poem. Well, in every line in the poem, but here in particular, diamonds are forever, so I gave you quartz, which is number 7 on the hardness scale.
We know immediately that this is not, that this is a temporary affair. Not forever.
Not
Whatever's
forever.
going to happen here is not forever.
Yes, not forever.
It's also the beginning of something that I think, I was thinking about this, Lloyd, when you mentioned how it points back to Donne, because I also think it points forward to, this was 1977. I was at Iowa, and the reigning aesthetic was lyric compression and not exactly tonal consistency, but there wasn't the notion of the poem as a play of voices. And it's really interesting how this poem, written in 1977 or earlier,
Earlier,
Yeah.
probably closer to, I mean, it was probably written in 69,
yeah,
actually.
Really?
Yeah, it's even, yes.
right.
As
And
it
I'm not
was
saying
writ-
that there weren't other poets writing in this mode, but the aesthetic of digression, extension, and tonal tension really I associate with the 90s and the 80s and 90s. David Rivard and Susan Mitchell and any number of other poets that wanted the poems to sort of, they didn't want that sort of lyric purity of tone and voice that was essentially what got beaten into our heads.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you should mention that, Stephen, because I would say this poem was influenced by Diane McCoskey,
Ah.
and that she was doing that
Yeah.
then.
No,
Yeah,
you would go to the Beats or
yeah,
the New
yeah.
York School for encouragement for Tutledge rather than to Donald Justice or Mark Strand or whoever.
And it was interesting, again, this is a Queens College story. There was Diane Wachowski was invited to read at Queens, and we were both waiting for the bus going back to the subway station together, and we got to talking. And at the time, there weren't a whole lot of models for women who were writing. There's Sylvia Plath, contemporary. There was Sylvia Plath, Audrey and Rich. And so every model was precious. And just to have Diane there and reading and someone you could chat to on the way to the subway made a big impression on me.
I didn't know that story.
Yeah.
So then you get, this is I would say this is an unusual poem in that it refers to the title in the second line. That's not often the case. It's either in the first line or in the last line. But suddenly we get the title in the second line. We understand where where the title comes from, and then you do another one of my favorite things in this poem, which is number 7 on the hardness scale. And it's hard enough to get to know anybody these days. And Susan, you are smiling. And unmute yourself and say why you are.
It cracked me up. I just loved it because there's the hardness scale and then it's hard enough. It's like a loose association, but very funny. But so it made me laugh. But I would like to say, since I'm unmuted, one of the things that strikes me all through the poem is the cutting nature of the words. They're like these, minerals that cut many times.
Yeah, and that's and that image or that underlying sense of scratching and cutting is also it's key to the poem, and it's upsetting.
Very.
But the language is so witty. It's so funny.
But it's brutal also.
Yeah. And again, and it's hard enough to get to know anybody these days, if only to scratch the surface. So Joyce is taking these, what are really sort of cliches of conversation, and turning them into something that is kind of, it's both seductive and also kind of scary.
Mhm.
And I think, and funny. And it's the play on words is funny, but there's also something, as you say, Susan, as something under the surface, well, under the surface, that is, that's very disturbing and a little a little scary, if only to scratch the surface. Hard enough to get to know anybody these days, if only to scratch the surface. And quartz will scratch 6 other mineral surfaces. And so here you're getting a whole new kind of sort of textbook language that is really very surprising in a poem. And I don't know, Joyce, do you please feel free to
Sure.
comment. I
Well,
mean, go
I mean,
ahead.
I think that goes with your observation about the first line of the poem, which begins with a piece of found language, found from that
Right.
De Beers ad.
Right.
And that found language appears throughout this, whether it's the language of cliche, of the kinds of comments that people make. And then that again is always something I've been interested in, is transforming ordinary speech into something that can be a poem.
Yeah.
And I think we share that interest.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Yeah.
We do. We do.
I have a question that may be completely off the mark, but I never asked Joyce this before. I feel the aura of the James Bond movie, the sassiness of the wit and sassiness of Sean Connery in that movie, and I wondered if that was there, because it was a big hit called Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking of Sean Connery specifically, but certainly the character in this poem could be that kind of popular character that might be the reason he's attractive to the speaker, because he's a James Bond style character. Though I think James Bond handled his liquor much better, at least in the movies. That certainly this was something that was in the air, even if I didn't specifically think about it when I was writing this. It was in the air.
Yeah.
Lloyd,
Yes.
I was going to say that the thing that was so unsettling to me is that she keeps switching diction so rapidly. So it feels like it's a mind that's a little bit unmoored. So Diamonds Are Forever is, as you said, received language, but it's this sort of advertising language that we know is a lie. You know, we like these pretty language, but we know it's not true. And it moves right away into scientific language, Hardness #7, and then to colloquial language. It's hard to know anybody, and it feels like the mind is always trying to find a foothold, as if she doesn't know how she can really feel about what's going on. And because the speaker feels a little unmoored, we feel unmoored in that way too, which is great. It's just exactly the mood for the poem.
I appreciate that reading of it. I really do, because then, the poem really becomes an action and not a description, because the mind that's unmoored, that's trying to make all of these decisions about how to think about this, that the process ends in the final lines and a decision is made. So I think one of the effects of that mind all over the place, using language from different sources, using different diction, the back and forth, the using an an advertising phrase that we know that ads are lies. It's really enacting, or what I hope it's doing is enacting that process that leads to the final lines rather than just a description.
Right. Bill,
The
oh,
poem.
go ahead.
Another thing that I think is wonderful in that phrase, "it's hard enough," is that you don't know what it means.
Mhm.
The cliche is, "oh, it's difficult enough," but you could easily read it that quartz is just hard enough to scratch the surface of the person you're trying to get to know.
Mm,
That it could be a tool.
Mhm.
mhm.
And so for a moment there, you just don't know what hard enough means. And I love that,
A fruitful ambiguity.
to be sure.
Um, Bill Signs. Um, this poem strikes me as a very American poem, and I'm wondering if that's challenging for you, or whether you're how comfortable are you with this very sort of American kind of language?
I don't know whether I found it tricky on that account. The found idioms are ones which are familiar to an English reader, and the the invocation of diamonds is one which makes sense here. It invokes Ian Fleming for me, and I suppose Immortal Diamond in Gerard Manley Hopkins. But in general, I tended to see the poem as utilizing wit to control emotions which would be liable to get out of hand if approached directly. The wit supplies an obliquity which constitutes a method of control. I didn't know as much as I think it was Stephen was capable of telling me about the dominant poetic forms and paradigms at the time of writing. But for me, 1969 makes me think of an ongoing and persistent confessionalism. I would have thought that still Lowell and Plath and W.D. Snodgrass and people of that ilk were defining at least one strand in American poetry. And this seems to me to engage with the kind of extreme feelings which they might be liable to incorporate, an abusive man after all, but it manages to avoid a kind of direct frontal engagement with those emotions by containing it within a witty construct, a conceit.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's problematical, particularly for an English reader, at
Oh,
least
good.
at this distance. Maybe in 1969 it might have been, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And that's very, very interesting and comment, because Diane Mukoski was also in many ways a confessional writer, even though she did not come out of that lineage directly. And so, yes, that was definitely part of that world in 1969.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was going to ask.
Yeah.
The poem that came to mind immediately when I first read this was Darren Mikowski's "Dancing on the Grave of a Son of a Bitch."
Yes.
Yeah.
But I don't know, was that before or after this one?
I don't remember specifically if that poem was written before or after, but she did have poems written about lovers and who didn't necessarily treat her well. So whether that poem specifically predates this, I can't remember.
But that poem, like this one, is a woman taking power via metaphorical means or psychological means by placing the lover, the bad lover, in all these mythic contexts. so that he suddenly is reframed in a brand new way. And except hers is more playful, yours, I think, cuts even deeper.
Mhm. Thank you.
Mm. Quartz will scratch 6 other mineral surfaces, and then we get the scientific list. It will scratch glass. It will scratch gold. It will even, and this is another line break that I like, because you're expecting some other mineral surface that quartz is going to scratch, and suddenly it will even scratch your eyes out one morning. You can't be too careful. And that suddenly we're really, you're pulling the rug out from under us. We're expecting something, and then we're not getting what we're expecting, because the language is both it's very playful language, but it's also really kind of, it's violent, it's awful, it's
menacing.
I'm sorry.
It's menacing.
It's menacing. Yeah. Yeah. It will scratch. And I love the way quartz and scratch,
Mhm.
all those sort of irritating consonants. Uh, uh, they're not exactly rhymes, but they kind of rhyme.
Mhm.
It will even scratch your eyes out one morning. You can't be too careful. And then we shift a little more, something very personal and as you say, menacing is happening. And then suddenly we go back to the sort of advertising world, or a different world, something we're familiar with from earlier in the poem. But diamonds are industrial. Well, that's a sort of new piece of information. So I bought you a ring of topaz, and that's not industrial. That's personal and intimate. Susan, yeah.
Sorry, the mute. I think she buys it for herself. I don't think she buys it for the. I bought a ring of.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wear it.
I wear it on my right hand.
Yeah.
Right. It's not a present.
No.
Yet.
I have a question.
Someone else had a hand up.
Yeah.
Earlier.
Pamela. Pam.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. One of the things that I'm noticing on this read through the poem is the references to blindness and to scratching your eyes out if you're not careful. And then toward the end of the poem, it will cut the sapphires of my eyes and I will bleed blind. And he's blind drunk. And so on. And I wanted to ask about that because it's this underlying menace or edginess in what is presumably a love poem. Okay.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of threat in this poem, and a commitment to this relationship is going to mean that the speaker is going to lose one of the senses is at risk, and also using seeing as a broader metaphor, that the speaker won't be able to see her situation, won't be able to really recognize what's going on. That is part of the threat there as
right,
well.
which makes this a very proto-feminist poem.
I
at
hope
this
so.
at this time. You know,
I
now
hope
that I
so.
know it's 1969.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, because this seems to me so prescient about what's going to happen in poetry, and it's still better than anything like this that's happened since. I mean, it just, to me, it just totally holds up, and it doesn't feel, I mean, we can date it because of the slogan and then the record.
Mm.
But as you say, that's changing now.
Mm.
So I I just had my turntable fixed.
I had a question for Joyce.
Stephen and then Catherine. Yeah.
I was just curious, Joyce, what for you, the line, I wear it on my right hand the way it was supposed to be, right? I mean, I love the introduction of the question, because it brings in a particular kind of diffidence. But I was just interested in your take, anybody's take, on the way it was supposed to be. Is there something to do with wearing a ring on the right hand that is a custom? I may not get what that custom is. I don't
Well,
wear one ring.
no, it's more
My left
that
hand.
it wasn't, whatever that ring was, it wasn't going to go on the left hand. I mean, she was
Okay.
not going to put a ring on it. as
Okay,
they
so it's
say.
essentially,
That's, yeah,
this
it's
isn't
like,
this
this
is
was
not
not
gonna go
going, this was not going to be something
Right.
that was planned.
Well, it wasn't going to be a wedding ring.
Wasn't going to be a wedding ring. Wasn't going
And
to
the
be,
use of right, of course,
yeah.
you know, is one. I mean, one of the things the poem does is it repeats words all the time, but they almost always wear different clothes when they're repeated.
Yeah.
Catherine?
Yeah, my comment is related to that. I was interested when somebody said shifting diction and unmoored, because it's a very energetic poem. And I picture the speaker like moving like the way a boxer does on his feet, always shifting
Oh, yeah,
around.
that's
You
right.
don't know, you don't know where the punch is going to come from. And, you know, there's kind of tough talking dame language, like including right, you know, that's a kind of right.
Right. Yeah.
So you keep taking us by surprise.
Well, I love that metaphor of the boxer in the ring. I think that's a wonderful way to think about this and the way the poem moves. Thank you.
Of course, then when you said that you like the feminism,
John?
Yeah, Lord, you call this a love poem, but it
Yeah.
also exists as a total anti-love poem, because the
Right.
diamonds are industrial. And by being industrial, they just diminish all of the romance in a love poem. It's completely undercut.
Well, it's kind of hard to tell until the very end how much romance there is in this relationship.
Oh yeah, we're going in that direction, and it's a great direction. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When?
Yeah, I was about ready to say it, the anti-love quote, and the way it becomes pornographic and in the almost pornographic in the end. He's harder than a diamond. Is an attack on the Hollywood substitution of an almost, people fall in love sexually, and when's the last movie that you saw where the sexual encounter was substituted for what we at some point in our lives have to learn that love comes from, don't happen that fast. And I think this poem anticipates that reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will certainly get to the ending of the poem uh, soon, and it is a totally knockout ending. Selena, I was going to ask you the same question that I asked Bill before about. I mean, are you in Brazil now, or
I am in Portugal now.
you're in Portugal?
Yes.
Oh, wow, that that sounds great. Um, so, how much does the sort of Americanism of this language does that get in your way of reading the poem, or
Not at all.
yeah,
From
great.
Not at all. From the first time, I felt very embraced by the poem because, first of all, I love the hardship part, but there is love when you deal with this, the drunkenness idea, the metaphor for the what is going wrong. But I feel it very much that there is also tenderness. Because for me as a woman, I love the diamonds, the sapphires, the I mean the everything it's that Joyce you mentioned. You know, when you say it even cuts glass, scratches glass, gold, and it will even scratch your eyes out one morning. You can't be too careful. Interesting that I did not feel as a threat. I felt
Hmm.
more, watch out, be careful, you know, tender, you're caring, you're advising.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
know it interesting how each person feels.
Yeah.
But what Joyce said, it's a feeling. I felt very much engaged in the poem.
Oh, great.
Know, from the first side. So thank you very much, Joyce, for
Oh,
this.
thank you. Thank
Great.
you.
And Denise, did you want to chime in?
Oh, please. Unmute yourself. Okay.
Yes. What I had been wanting to say was that as a love poem, it's in a funny category. It's not at all conventional. You know, it's clear that there are themes of danger and fear and perhaps a fundamental unsuitability wrapped up in whatever the attraction is, whatever the bond. And one of the things I put in, the only thing I put in the chat was the use of the hardness scale suggests, proposes even, that there is a hierarchy, not just of commitment, but also of attraction / affection. And this poem is trying to locate a relationship on a personal hardness scale. In both senses, how hard it is to be in the relationship and how durable. That's all.
Oh, I just want to say something about Denise, and Denise has just been elected the new co-president of the New England Poetry Club, Denise and Doug Holder, and congratulations
Congratulations.
on that.
Thank you. I don't think it's been announced yet.
Oh, okay, don't tell anyone. But it has happened. So let's see. We are at, I wear it on my right hand the way it was supposed to be, right? No tears and fewer regrets. And there is that emotion that Selena was just talking about also, that there's gonna be something cool about this relationship, and that's okay. It seems to me that's, for the moment, that's okay with the narrator. Or is she being really ironic about, well, there's no permanent commitment here, and that's right, isn't it? I mean, that she's asking the question. So I think there's a kind of ambiguity going on about what's in the what the narrator is feeling, that she is going along with this, and she's saying she's okay with it, but then we're not absolutely sure if she's really okay with it the way it was supposed to be, right? And she's going along with some kind of convention in this relationship, and we're not absolutely sure. I mean, she seems to be feeling more than one thing at the same time, to me. Stephen.
I think it really, your notion of ambivalence and ambiguity in the line, for reasons smooth and clear as glass, because whose reasons? You know, and even smooth and clear as glass feels a little peremptory. You know, it's like, well, okay, so she may feel that way and not feel that way, but it looks like he's kind of saying, we all know we got to be reasonable about this, and reasonable is not, you know, not always welcome.
Reasonable is not emotional.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the word
yeah.
reason, I mean, whether you want to gender it or not, it still feels a little bit like the guy in the Hemingway story who tells his girlfriend, be reasonable, have it, you know.
And then we already know that glass is it may be clear and smooth, but it's also not very permanent or Catherine.
Yeah, before we go on to the rest of that line, I'd like to ask Joyce a question.
Sure.
No tears and fewer regrets. Fewer than none.
Exactly.
Were you
That can't be
thinking of yellow
possible.
leaves? Were you thinking of the line yellow leaves or none or few do shake against?
I wasn't thinking of the Shakespeare sonnet. It's a paradox. No tears and fewer regrets. Well, you can't have fewer than none. So I think it's part of that sense of ambivalence and confusion, which it's different from what's going on in that Shakespeare sonnet, which I once, the yellow leaves, or the leaves are either yellow or few or none. And
yellow or none
or few.
Yellow,
that's
none,
why I was asking
none or few.
Which is such a surprise.
You know, it's you could almost tell exactly what time of year it is, and which trees have yellow leaves and which trees have no leaves and which trees have few leaves. But I in this line, I wasn't echoing that poem, that song.
But the paradox is a very unreasonable thing.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
so logic is sort of disrupted by that paradox. And then comes the word reason.
Yes.
But I actually, Catherine, I actually love that you thought of that Shakespeare line. And I mean, because in a way, because Shakespeare is comparing his life to the trees that are
time of year, the time of day,
and losing their leaves, and I think that order when yellow leaves or none or few do hang upon the boughs, that Shakespeare is saying, he's comparing himself to these things. And he's saying, well, they're yellow leaves, so it's the autumn of my life. And maybe there are none. Oh, no, there's still some left.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
so that there is that kind of ambiguity there that I think is very relevant to the ambiguity and the ambivalence of feeling in Joyce's poem. I mean, it's not the same image exactly, but there is something about that, about the way Joyce goes back and forth between agreeing to this non-commitment and resenting it, or being scared by it, or being put off by it in some way, the way it was supposed to be, right? And that's, was it supposed to be like this? We're not sure it was supposed to be like this, and then it kind of gets worse. It will scratch for reasons pure and clear as glass. Topaz will scratch glass. It will scratch your quartz and all your radio crystals. And I mean, that reference is may require a footnote.
Yes, that hasn't come back.
That
unlike
hasn't
the
come back.
unlike the turntable.
Right. And it will scratch your quartz and all your radio crystals. Sometimes the you,
Yeah.
I have to think about this. Sometimes the you in the poem is the poet.
Yes.
The way we talk about, you do this, you say this. In this case, I've always taken the you to be the other person. That she's going to get even with this other person, or this other person has to watch himself too. That he might lose all his radio crystals. You'll have to be silent the rest of your days, not to mention your nights. Again, this wonderful colloquial language that Joyce keeps turning and looking at from so many different angles. You think, I don't know, Kurt and Kristen, you know how we don't want you to use cliches in your poems.
Yes.
And yet here is Joyce, not just using cliches, but turning them inside out.
Right.
You have to know the rule to break it.
Right.
And break it
Exactly.
well. And I think that is something that always came across in workshop, like teaching us these are the things that are a little taboo, but if you do it skillfully,
right,
this poem kind of demonstrates how that can be done.
And they work really well as that inoculation that the speaker is doing. You can't be too careful means you have to be careful with your heart, but also just using cliches as a way of distancing. And maybe the hardness scale itself is like someone was talking about logic, it's like logicalizing the emotions that you're feeling and saying, oh, you know what, science is the way to think about a relationship, right? Is it?
Yeah, isn't it? Well, let's go. Yeah, let's go on. Let's see what happens next.
Thanks to both of you.
Oh,
Thanks
yeah.
for being here.
Thank you. We've unfortunately got to cut out early, but we really appreciate
Being
seeing
here.
and being
Yeah.
here.
And Kristen, I want to tell you that I think you were the last person before Joyce who was a living writer who read your poem, and how much I got so much great feedback on your reading and your poem on Nothing. And I want to thank, since you're here, and for Joyce, I just wanted to mention that was a very powerful reading, and it got a great response from the group.
Yes,
And thank you.
I had good mentors.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen that, it was recorded, correct? It's available? Yeah, I definitely recommend it.
Thank you guys. And like I said, we had good mentors. So that's part of it.
Yeah.
Oh, well. Good.
Thank you.
So you'll, if this quartz is going to scratch his radio crystals, he's going to have to be silent the rest of his days, not to mention your nights. So there's a kind of difference. There's a difference between days and nights. That also I think there's some ominous element to this. Not to mention your nights, not to mention, and I love this repeating not to mention on the same line. And that not to mention is, if you took this phrase out of context, you would say, you'd never use this in a poem. And Joyce uses it twice in the same line to make this surprising turn, and to really keep us on our toes, on our mental toes. Not to mention your nights, not to mention the night you ran away very drunk, very. Again, I love these line breaks. They are so surprising to me. You know, I've known this poem for not 50 years, but close to that, and I am always surprised as I read it. It's just so full of surprises, and it has to do with the way you use language, and the way you use some very ordinary language and make it extraordinary, and make it meaningful and playful and sinister, and all of these, and everything else that you do with it. Terry, Teresa, I know you know Joyce's poems very well, and you've been very quiet today, but I have to ask you, where does the hardness scale fit in your knowledge and sense of Joyce as a poet?
Hi, Lloyd. Yeah, I tend to be quiet in these things, and yeah, my name is,
but I want to hear
what
what you
Teresa, actually, but you always knew me as Terry. I think it's such a pleasure to come back to this poem that I've known for so long, and see its brilliance all over again, and and to know that it was really, be reminded that it was done so early in Joyce's writing career. And I've seen these moves in other poems, but I
Right.
think this is really a quintessential Joyce Peseroff poem, and it's I
Yeah.
think and the wit is particularly striking to me.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa.
I didn't
Or
mean
Joyce.
to, I didn't mean to make you talk if you didn't want to,
Oh
but
no, I'm actually glad you asked me to. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have said anything. So
yeah, but I'm glad you did.
thank you.
Thank you. Um, not to mention your nights, not to mention the night you ran away very drunk, very drunk, and the use of these veries and beginning, you know, interrupting the very with the line break is, I can hear it. I can always, you know, I can hear the voice in this poem, and it's set up in a way that makes me hear the voice of this narrator, of this person who is saying all these things, and who is very brilliant and playful and underlying this is something, you know, unsettling. Very drunk, and you tried to cross the border but couldn't make it across the lake, which is, I think, is both funny and 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 really pathetic about about this person. And we wonder, you know, crossing the border, and what does that mean? Is it going to Canada? Is it going to you know, Pennsylvania? We don't know which border it is, but also crossing borders, isn't crossing borders a kind of element in the poem? Is it a good thing to cross a certain border, or is it really not such a good thing to cross the line, cross the border? But couldn't make it across the lake, stirring up geysers with the oars. You drove the red canoe in circles, tried to pole it, but your left hand, and now, and I mean, it just, I'm always just in awe of how nothing gets left behind. So we've already had a kind of difference between the right hand and the left hand. And now the right hand doesn't know what the left hand, the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. And it's a very loaded phrase in the context of this poem. We always say, again, it's another cliche. Well, you know, your right hand, my right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing. I feel that way when I'm typing all the time. But here it's something much more loaded, and that has to do with the relationship and the ambivalence in this relationship.
Lloyd, can I just
Yes, Jim, hi. Please.
I mean, speaking of loaded, is that all of the transgressions in this poem up until this point are at arm's length, that is to say, to scratch, to damage, whatever. And all of a sudden, you've got not once in the poem, but twice, a really long distance, violent hunting rifle. And it seems to me that this is a huge difference in degree of what's threatening in this relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. And
And you know, the phrase "the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing" also often has to do with deception, where you know you're trying to set things up so the left hand doesn't know what the right hand was doing. So it's not just a mistake, but a conscious deception.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's very unsettling.
Yeah.
And
And what happens next is even
yes,
what comes next is the most unsettling.
right.
Yeah.
You fell asleep and let everyone know it when you woke up. When you woke up. Yeah. In a gin-soaked morning, hair of the dog. Oh, wait, oh, David, what did you write in the chat box? It went by so fast I couldn't read it.
The origin, as far as I know, of the left hand, right hand is in the context of charity. When thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth. So
That's
it's
interesting. Huh.
it's deceiving or hiding your generosity from your own ego. It does put a spin on it in this poem.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, that had I didn't know that. Yeah. And does everyone know what hair of the dog refers to? No. When?
Well, I got stuck on the oars in the canoe. You paddle a canoe and 2 oars in a rowboat.
So you're absolutely right. You don't use oars to paddle a canoe. The woman who wrote this poem grew up in the Bronx and Queens and didn't really know that. But you know, you can read that as saying when this character goes to the boathouse, he can't tell the rowboat from the canoe and he grabs the wrong implement. But you're absolutely right. Yes, you don't use oars in a canoe, you use paddles.
Huh. So as a Brooklyn and Queens person, I didn't know that either.
It's your Cortez.
Yes.
Rather than Balboa.
Right. Anyway, let's. And I was asking if everyone knew what hair of the dog meant.
It bit you. The hair of the dog that bit you. Get drunk in the morning and you'll forget you've got a hangover.
Right. Well, right. If you get drunk in the morning, yeah. So it's the hair, exactly. It's the hair of the dog that bit you. That means, well, you got drunk the night before, so in the morning you get drunk again.
Yes,
or have something
you drink
else.
again.
You drink again.
Yeah.
It's to deal with the hangover, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Right. It's supposed to be a cure, but
it's infinite regress.
Right. Jim, you were going to say something? No?
I have a question about the hand thing, right hand, left hand.
Yes.
Can't it also mean, and you know, it sounds like it can mean quite a few things. Isn't it also an image for like administrative incompetence? The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. I've heard it used that way to describe any number of universities.
Yeah. Yes. And elsewhere.
Yeah.
And elsewhere. You went hunting for geese, shot 3 lake trout in violation of the game laws. I do find that very funny. That I mean, this guy is really as we say, a character, um, and well, anyway, shot 3 lake trout in violation of the game laws. Told me to clean them.
Yeah, yeah.
And that my eyes were bright as sapphires. So here is someone who's being very chauvinistic, and well, yeah, you do the work and you're awfully pretty.
Exactly. Exactly.
Bright as sapphires, and then you bring us back to the central image. Which is number 9 on the hardness scale. So we're going up that scale. It's getting harder and harder. A sapphire will cut a pearl. It will cut stainless steel. I think of that as maybe the knife that's gonna cut the fish, that's gonna clean the fish. It will cut vinyl and mylar, and will probably, and I have to say, this is also one of my favorite moments in one of my many favorite moments in the poem. It will cut vinyl and mylar, and will probably cut a record this fall. And that's suddenly this whole, again, this cliche of cutting a record kind of comes out of the blue. And then but it's not forgotten. Joyce uses it. These were probably records that maybe both partners in this relationship, well, that's what comes next, might listen to be released on an obscure label known only to aficionados. And that just seems so right on about the record industry and the music industry and popular music. Oh, thank you, Pam. The chats go by so quickly.
Oh,
Marina. Oh, Marina.
Ellen and Jim, did you guys want to chime in?
Oh.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a word about cut, the
yeah.
wonderful shift from the cutting to cutting the record. But it brings us back to that this is an artistic work, and the work is being created as we experience it. And I think that's a lovely moment in the poem as we go from there.
Thank you. Yeah. Boy, I so agree. John.
There's also a point, I think I might be stretching it here, but the cut the record or cut a record might also be a reference to like setting a standard of violence, because of the following line, something is released and you get released from prison. And maybe I'm extending the metaphor way too far, but it sort of just suggests that maybe there's just a whiff of it in the air rather than an actual image.
Yeah. Well, you're allowed. But I again, I love the way that it just conjures up a whole lifestyle, really. Cut a record, and even this fall, it's always, all the, I think, maybe this is even still sort of happening in the popular pop music world, that, well, the record isn't coming out next week. It's coming out next fall, maybe. So there's always this kind of tentativeness about that, to be released on an obscure label known only to aficionados. And I will, anyway, that whole, it conjures up that whole world, which I think is really marvelous. I will buy a copy. I may buy you a copy, depending on how your tastes have changed. Well, that's pretty loaded also. And that's, you know, it's not only his taste in music, but maybe who his partners are, who his romantic partners are, depending on how your tastes have changed. I will buy copies for my friends. We'll get a new needle, a diamond needle, and diamonds are forever. And I guess most of us know that a diamond needle is what you use on a
stylus, yeah.
on an LP, a stylus.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I just go back for a second, Lloyd?
Yes.
Isn't the absurdity of the passage involving the cutting of the record partly to do with the fact that it's the sapphire which is the subject of the verb? It will be cutting the record,
yes.
And the people in the poem who are going to buy copies of it maybe know nothing about this record. So the record is somehow spontaneously generated or brought into being by the sapphire, which in any case only entered the poem because it was the slightly insincere compliment paid by the man to the woman in the poem. So the whole thing is sort of some absurd excursion which hangs from a kind of invisible peg. It's very bizarre, but it's a kind of bizarreness and absurdity which goes along with the wit in the poem as a way of exercising a kind of control over that which is all too real, the nastiness and ugliness of the male figure.
Right. No, I think you're absolutely right. Also, I mean, it's the sapphire that's cutting the record, but also, I mean, and maybe most of you probably don't remember that you could also get a sapphire needle, which was cheaper than a stylus, which was cheaper than the diamond, but didn't last as long because it wasn't as hard, wasn't as high up on the hardness scale. We'll get a new needle, a diamond needle, which is number 10 on the hardness scale, and will cut anything. It will cut wood and mortar, plaster and iron. What? Any thoughts about why those particular items? I mean, if it'll cut anything, any ideas about, any thoughts about why these in particular, wood and mortar, plaster and iron?
I can tell you.
Yay.
I mean, these are the things you use to build a house.
Exactly.
I knew
Yeah, they're domestic.
Exactly. Yeah,
they're domestic.
That's definitely what I was thinking about. And then it gets really scary.
Yeah.
It will cut the sapphires in my eyes. Of course, he's already compared her eyes to sapphires.
Mm-hmm.
And I will bleed, blind as 4 a.m. in the subways when even degenerates are dreaming. It's very sweet about degenerates in the subways. it's very, it seems to me very touching that, that, you know, that they're falling asleep and dreaming. Blind as the time you shot up the room with a new hunting rifle, blind drunk as you were. So, yeah. John, were you saying? No. Okay. And then the biggest surprise in the poem.
Yes.
You and Wen has already suggested this. You were number 11 on the hardness scale. So suddenly it's also, here's where it becomes a kind of love poem, certainly very sexual, and but also, I mean, there's an ambiguity there too, isn't there? You were number 11 on the hardness scale. I think we think at that point, after he's shot up the room with his hunting rifle, that he was really this bad character. You were even worse. You were number 11 on the hardness scale, and yet it's transformed into something, again, completely surprising and yet inevitable, that there maybe the abusive quality of his relationship is also, for the narrator, is also attractive or desirable, or there's so much ambiguity in the nature of this relationship, and then it becomes, she's very knowing by the time you get to the end of the poem. You were number 11 on the hardness scale later that night, and that's a surprise. I think I'm ready to think, oh, you think even shooting up the room was bad. This is even going to be worse. You were number 11 on the hardness scale. But then it's not. Later that night, apologetic, as you worked your way up slowly from the knees. He's really all over the place. And you worked your way down from the open-throated blouse. Diamonds are forever, so I give you softer things. And I find that incredibly moving. That, I mean, she sort of knows all of this about him, and yet, you know, she's willing to wear the topaz, and it's not going to be on the left hand, and she's going to buy it, and maybe she's going to give him a record that they may both enjoy or not. And then diamonds are forever, so I give you softer things. And I think we sort of know this isn't going to last, but there's something there that that's very emotional and I find very moving. Jennifer, yeah.
I was just going to say it makes it seem effortless, the return to the syntax of the first line,
Right.
Diamonds are forever, so, and when you do that, you realize, yes, in the first line, quartz was softer than diamond.
Right.
In the last line, softer things has moved to a different kind of scale, but
Right.
in literal terms, of course, they're the same. I mean, I'm drawing attention to something that doesn't draw attention to itself, but I love this so in the middle of
Right.
both of those lines and
Both of them.
the kind of work it does and the way we've come full circle with such a difference. So
Yeah. And then it just, I don't know. It's certainly that ending gets to me in a kind of emotional way that the whole poem is building up to, but that you haven't exactly felt before. It's so witty, it's so playful, it's so ironic, it's full of all of these maybe intellectual devices, and that are just that are breathtaking, they're brilliant. And then suddenly at the very end, there's something that's really very emotional and that really gets to me, and finally is the biggest surprise. It seems to me it's the biggest surprise in the poem, that that it is a poem about feeling and complicated feelings, and 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 I find that both very surprising and always very surprising, and also very moving. Mary.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to touch on this too. I'm blown away by the end of the poem. I'm blown away by the whole poem. It's just exquisite. And if I can say a couple things,
No, don't.
the ending brings me back to the first, not just the first line, but the first 10 lines. And I kind of see the first 10 lines as like the first round of analysis, and maybe even obsessive analysis and systematizing, right? Creating a system of rating people, emotions, and it goes, it ends up in a scary place, right? It ends up where we don't really expect it. It will even scratch your eyes out one morning.
Yeah.
And then you can't be too careful. I just think that's an amazing and really pivotal moment in the poem. And it seems like the speaker has to work out the system, which is kind of distancing and scientific and exploratory, before she can dive into the kind of gory details of this actual relationship. So I wanted to just talk about that link between the last line and the opening 10 lines of the poem. I also wanted to comment on just what I can't get over the brilliance of the way this last line works, because I think, so I will give you softer things. It suggests tenderness, right? A kind of a loving tenderness for this person who she sees can't handle hard things very well, including the hardness of liquor. But so it's a tender move, forgiving, tender, kind of almost nurturant. It's also a diminishing move, right? Temporary, right? This ain't no diamond. This is a soft, i.e. temporary thing. And at the same time, it's kind of like, to me, I pick up a sense of self-protection. He just has soft things, to muck around with. Like the soft things is kind of like a counterpoint to the gun, I think. I don't know. Anyway, it's like it's triply ambiguous, and it seems to do all those things at the same time. I just love it.
Great. Stephen?
Oh, Ellen?
Do I have a dirty mind?
No.
Yes.
Yes. Isn't everything from you to softer things incredibly carnal too?
Yes.
And Joyce, weren't you? I mean, he's working his way up. He's working when open-throated blouse. What are those softer things after an open-throated blouse? I mean, I'm surprised that, I mean, I do think there's tenderness there, but it's an extremely unsettlingly sexual scene from, you know, and I know you couldn't have seen Spinal Tap when you wrote this poem, but to go to 11, which has become this sort of joke of going farther than you can go, works so beautifully retrospectively in.
Well, Stephen, they obviously got that from this poem.
They knew that. I mean, there's a thank you at the end of the movie. So I just want to make sure that I'm not like looking at a Rorschach test here.
No, you're not. No, not at all.
Yeah.
John.
Oh, there's something that keeps me from going wholeheartedly, 100% toward your vision or version of this poem. I still think there's this, ambivalence going on, this anti-love thing going on, and the speaker, is not wholeheartedly involved in this, despite how much she offers and gives to him. And that I see is in slowly from the knees, where the speaker could have said my knees, or from the open-throated blouse, from my open-throated blouse. She's not in on this relationship. It's really more of a sexual thing than real romance.
Oh, I agree. It's makeup sex, but only from his point of view.
Ellen, jump in.
I think she's all in. The bookended first line and last line that are so parallel. It's the past tense, gave in the first line. The final line, I give, present. He's there.
Very nice.
Well, it just highlights the ambiguous and difficult route that the speaker takes at this point. It really is absolutely wonderful in how it does it. Really wonderful.
And the giving, too, I'm so glad. Oops, I'm sorry. I'm so glad Ellen mentioned the give, because it's also kind of striking that, and I love that she's the provider of the signs, symbols of commitment. It's unusual, right? We don't think of the woman, the woman is buying the rings, right? She's choosing quartz for him. And I think that's a really nice element in the poem as well. But I love that I love that observation, Ellen.
Stephen?
I was just going to say that remembering this, having lived through this time, it's a great portrait of the sexual politics of the time. So, birth control gave liberation, but the liberation was often slanted toward the men. Yes, the woman might not get pregnant, but the man was taking advantage. And the tenderness to me at the end of the poem is that the woman speaker has now acknowledged all the furious incompetence of the male. It's all phallic, the canoe going haywire, the oars, the guns, the male needing to think he needs to do what he does. And then the end, she's realizing, how helpless he is in a way. And maybe the woman in that, I almost thought motherly gesture says, no, I can offer you my softness. I can offer you a kindness. It's sort of an odd thing about the sexual politics, because you wouldn't think the speaker should do that. The male should have already, disallowed himself, but somehow she finds the kindness to be able to still accept him.
Joyce, we've really kind of run out of time, and Marita is doing this from her house.
Yes, yeah, I don't
want to. We can't take any more advantage of that than we have already. But I would, if you have any sort of last words, that we love to hear them.
I'd like to respond to Steve saying that this is a poem of its time, and it did come out of its time. It came out of its time in the social world, in the artistic world, in the time of the life of the writer, who was I was very young when I wrote this poem. So all of these things come together in making this happen. And it is amazing to me that again, 50 years after, about 50 years after it was published in Plowshares, that people are discussing it and enjoying it and really, really seem to be able to relate to it and get pleasure from it. So makes me very happy to hear everything that you've said.
Well, I think that it's really great that it's part of its time, that most great poems are part of their time, and that the perspective we have on the time doesn't change how good the poem is. That we can place it, but what we love about it is in the way that it's written and in the complicated and interesting and finally very moving images that and language that we get from it. It's always been just a special pleasure of mine, and I clearly am seeing a bunch of people who share that pleasure. And thank you so much for participating and reading it.
Well, thank everyone here for their close reading and attention to this. I really appreciate it.
Great. And thank you. And Marita, thank you so much for, and especially since you're not really working today, it's very generous of you to allow this to continue. And even from, yes, Jonathan, absolutely, many thumbs up and much gratitude. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, everyone. And really, this is just so beautiful. It was really wonderful to hear Joyce, you read your poem. Great discussion. And Lloyd, thank you again. Wonderful. Be well, everyone.
Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.